Digital modes, they're nuts to me, at least. I have a very hard time understanding this whole thing. WSJT has 11 different modes, and some of them have sub modes. So here tonight is Gary Sutcliffe, who's going to be discussing some of those. And I'm looking forward to this. I hope you all are too. Thank you.
Okay. Gary, if you put the slides up. How many people have used FT8? If you have, raise your hand. Good number. What about online? How many of you guys have used FT8? I only see a couple of them there. FT8 is probably the most popular mode right now in ham radio, but it's part of a suite called WSJT, which stands for Weak Signal Joe Taylor. And it's just one of the different modes that are available. We're going to talk about some of the different modes that even if you are a pretty heavy FT8 user, you maybe been. How's that? Okay, I was causing feedback before. Anyway, next slide. So what is WSJT? Well, it's a suite of communication protocols for ham radio. It was developed by Joe Taylor, K1JT. He's a really sharp guy. He won a Nobel Prize for discovering binary pulsars. So he's big into radio astronomy. I think he's worked with NASA on communications with the deep space probes. And so he really understands the kinds of things that are required when you're trying to do copy weak signals. And originally, this was all designed for weak signal work on VHF. The very first two modes that came out in 2001 were for meteor scatter and moon bounce, which are two modes that are very difficult. And this really lowered the bar for what it would take because of the technology that's involved. When you're doing those kinds of contacts, it's very difficult. The signals are so weak, or the signals are only there very short periods of time. So they had to come up with some ways of having a format for the QSOs, what was considered a completed QSO, and they came up with a whole set of protocols. And so when he came up with WSJT, he actually used those same types of timing and frequency protocols and stuff in developing it. And we'll go into that a little bit deeper. FT8 was actually developed for 6 meters for sporadic E. That's what got me interested in it. I was a pretty early adopter, about a month or two after it came out, because trying to work different countries on 6 meters, and we had no sunspots for 10 or 12 years, and to do 6 meters, but people were using it with sporadic E, multi-hop sporadic E with WSJT, and that was going to be my chance, I hope, to get DXCC on 6 meters. So it got me interested. And some of the HF people started playing around with it, and it became very, very popular because it really lowered the bar for what it would take to make contacts. To do moon bounce on 2 meters, you used to have to run at least a kilowatt and maybe a minimum of like 4 Yagis. I've made moon bounce contacts with under 100 watts in a single Yagi using this mode. And that's still minimal, but special conditions. But it just makes it a lot easier. And for people that are limited in power or antennas and stuff, they can make contacts around the world on HF with FT8, which is one of the reasons for the popularity. Next slide. So we're going to start out with some communication basics, some basic theory. We'll talk a little bit about the equipment, and we'll talk about the sequencing that all the WSJT QSOs follow. We'll go through a quick survey of the different modes, or the more popular ones. Now, I'm not going to go into detail how to set this up or how to operate it. There's lots of information online and articles and stuff, or other people. So I want to just kind of show what's available that maybe you're not using, or maybe something you want to get on and try, rather than the average, just how to use this stuff and set it up. There's a lot of other sources that are probably do a better job than me. Next slide. So I have a question. What is the minimal signal strength that can be copied, and what is the limiting factor? No double E's can answer. I want somebody else to answer that one. Any guesses? It's noise. Okay, next slide. So how weak can the signal? It's not the signal strength, it's how it compares to the noise. If we look at signal noise ratio as the limiting factor, and that just basically, you take the two signals and go through a quick formula and you get the difference in dB. And if the noise is stronger than the signal, then you can't really pick it out it's harder to pick out. Now, if the signal is just weak, we can amplify it. There's no problem. You can have an infinite amount of amplification if you want to. That's pretty easy to do. But the problem is, if there's signals inside the noise, you're also amplifying the noise. So you don't really improve the signal noise ratio, just louder, but it's no better. And amplifiers also add some of their own noise. So at some point, you start to add more noise back in, which makes the conditions worse. And that decreases the signal to noise ratio. Okay, next one. This is a chart showing some of the different modes. But before we go into that, look on the left-hand side and some key dB numbers. At the very bottom there's the equation, which is dBs is a relative thing. It's not like an absolute thing like number of watts. It's just how two signals compare. Which one's louder, which one's weaker. And it's a logarithmic scale because we go through such large signal strength differences. If you hear some guy who's just barely audible, he's many negative dB maybe, but you compare that to another signal like your guy across the street who's running his kilowatts, you're talking tens of thousands or more difference in the signal strength. And if you try to do a graph, it's not good, not easy to do. So we use dBs. A couple of key things to remember. You don't have to really do the math, but it's kind of useful just to kind of get a flavor for things. If you double a signal, you'll get 3 dB. If you cut a signal in half, then you get minus 3 dB. So every time you double, you can just add another 3 dB. You can also add these together. So if you multiply it by 4, that's 3 dB plus another 3 dB because you double and a double. So you just add those together and you get 6 dB by increasing your signal by a factor of 4. The signals that are divisible by 10 are real easy. Like say 10 times the signal, you get a 10 dB gain. If you have a tenth of the signal, you get a minus 10 dB. If you go to 100, it's 20 dB. If you go to 1,000, it's 30 dB. You see a pattern here? What if the thing was 10,000? Signal was 10,000 times more. Is that divided by 10,000? How many dB do you get? 40. Basically, it's just the first digit's a number of zeros, followed by the 0. It tells you how many dB it is. So look on the right-hand side now. We see what the typical minimum signal-to-noise ratios you need for various modes. Sideband requires a good signal. It's about 6 dB, or about 4 times the amount of noise. 0 dB means that the noise and the signal are exactly the same power level. CW, people can usually copy about minus 3 dB. So the CW signal could be half the power than the noise, and most people should be able to copy that. 10 dB is considered extreme. I've heard of people that do moon bounce by CW. Some claim that they've been able to copy minus 14. Maybe, I don't know. Then we go down to FT8, it's minus 23 dB. So 20 dB is 1/100th, but 23 is another doubling that. So essentially, if the signal on FT8 is 1/200th of the noise level of the noise and your receiver, you should be able to copy that with the FT8, which is pretty impressive when you think about that. And there's some other modes we'll talk about that go down even deeper into the noise. And on the right, you can kind of just get a flavor for meter readings. Now, S meters are based on microvolt signals as a base. But an S1 signal is, see, about 0.2 microvolts, and S9 is about 50 microvolts in the 50 ohms. And every S unit is basically about 6 dB. Now, that's kind of the general standard. Some radios are a little bit different than that, but that's a basic rule of thumb. Next slide. So we got the noise we have to deal with, and we want to get our signal across. So how do we deal with that? Well, there's some things that play into this. If you want to have high data rates, then you need a larger bandwidth and higher signal noise. On an alternate, if we aren't so concerned about speed, we can send it at a lower data rate and at a narrower bandwidth, and that can improve our signal noise ratio. Another thing is the more you know about a signal, the better you can go and dig into to dig out the signal of the noise. So if you know what frequency that you're looking for, that helps to detect whether the signal is there or not. I'm going to be operating a 10-meter contest this weekend. I've said, well, if you hear me on, give me a call and make a contact. Well, you don't know what frequency I'm on. 10 meters is a pretty big band. You don't want to be tuning across the whole band to find me. Probably not. But I told you I was going to be at 28025. That would make it a lot easier for you. Also, if I said I'm going to be there at noon, that's probably a lot better than if I said I'll be on this weekend sometime. Do you want to be tuning across the whole band all weekend to find me? Probably not. But same thing works kind of with the software. If it knows what frequency it should be then when it should be there, it can use some mathematical techniques to dig that signal out. Because of that, some of the WSJT modes need pretty good frequency accuracy. You want to be within a few hertz. And also close clock synchronizations is also important for a lot of them. And the following technique is, rather than just sending the data, you put some redundancy data in there with certain algorithms. So if it loses a bit or two of the data stream, you can often reconstruct it by using some error correction codes. Next slide. Equipment, you're going to need a sideband radio on the PC. Some people use Macs, but we don't want to get into that because we don't want to get into religion here tonight. You'll need a sound card. I'm sorry, Gary. You'll need a sound card. Now, some of the interfaces now have sound cards built in. So if you have an audio-only interface, then you'll basically go through the interface, which is usually some transformers and some sort of a voltage divider. And it'll go audio into the sound card of your PC. Some of the other ones interfaces have a built-in sound card, and those are often good because they're tailored better for digital type work than your typical one that's PC for listening to music or whatever. So either an audio or USB thing. A lot of the newer radios, like the IC7300 and other ones, have built-in sound cards, so now you just plug it in with USB, and it's real easy to set up. Okay, we mentioned before that the protocols were based on old meteor scatter and moon bounce. Now, with these modes, you don't know when you're going to be able to hear the guy, because a meteor scatter, you're waiting for a meteor, and you might have a schedule to work somebody, but you may not hear a meteor for 5 minutes. So you need to know when you should be transmitting and when to be receiving. Because if both guys are transmitting at the same time or both listening at the same time, that's not going to be very effective. Similar with from moon bounce, the signals are often very, very weak. And because of Faraday rotation and some other factors, fading, you may be going and all of a sudden you suddenly start hearing the signals after a long time. So you need to have kind of a sequence. And you also want to be efficient about this. We aren't putting any extra information in there than the minimum to make a QSO. This is not a reg chewing type of thing. It's just to prove that you can make a contact. Um, for WSJT, we have transmit and receive periods where one station will be transmitting for a certain period of time, then the other one will be transmitting to alternate through. And the different modes, you'll transmit either somewhere between 7.5 seconds all the way to 30 minutes, and then receive for 30 minutes, depending what the mode is. And it's all this is all handled by the computer, the program. It keeps track of things, and of course your PC clock has to be set. And it'll be determined who's going to transmit first and who's going to transmit second, so that you're on transmit at the same time. Now, most of these modes use FSK, which is frequency shift keying, and there'll be a number like 4 FSK or 8 FSK or 65 FSK. That's a number of different tones. So what'll happen is your signal will transmit at a certain frequency, and then for a certain period of time, then it'll shift to a different one and shift to back, and the sequence will determine what the information is being sent and encoding. But if it's 4 FSK, it means there's 4 different tones it uses, and 8 tones, and 65 means there's 65 different tones that are used. Now at the radio, there's used for sideband. We always use upper sideband, and we use a 2.5 or 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth. And the number of stations that can fit in that bandwidth can depend on how wide the bandwidth of each signal. We'll talk a bit about that as we go into the other different modes. The next one. Frequency modes, there's some standard frequencies that are used. If you use WSJT and you say, I want to use this mode on this band, and it'll tell you what the standard frequency is. But sometimes there's some different frequencies. The expeditions that are using it will often go to a different frequency, so congestion won't be so bad. And on 20 meters right now, you probably have a hard time finding a frequency in the standard FT8 frequency. There's just so many stations on. And they can handle like 50 different signals at the same time. And you're still going to have sometimes trouble finding a clear spot. So they'll often use different frequencies. There's some other customs to like 6 meters on FT8. The standard frequency is 50.313. If we get a good opening to Europe, then a lot of times we'll go up to 50.323, up 10 kilohertz. And then we'll follow a very strict sequence that the North American stations transmit on the even sequences, and the Europeans on the odd one. And one of the big advantages of that is if you've got some guy across town who's operating and he's transmitting when you're trying to copy the weak European, that's going to be a problem. But if all the Americans are transmitting at one time and all the Europeans, and we're just trying to contact each other across the pond, you don't have the interference from stations nearby. For meteor scatter and moon bounce, the custom is the westernmost station will transmit for the first sequence. Next. Here's kind of a picture. If you look at the clock, this is for FT8 or any of them that are using a 15-second sequence. So the even one is the first from 0 to 15 seconds. The second one is 15 to 30 and so on, and then this repeats itself. And in the sequences you can see on the left side, let's say I'm operating, I hear Bill W9XQ calling CQ. He's calling CQ, and it's very short. It's CQ, his call sign, his grid. So if I want to contact him, I'll call him on the second sequence, and he'll be listening. And if he hears me, he'll come back and send the call signs and the signal report. And then I'll go back and send R and then the signal report. R means that I received his signal report. And his report's something. And then he'll go and say R73 means he's copied me, and 73 would, end the contact. And then I'll go and say 73. And then that contact is considered an official complete QSO. Now we're getting a little bit area of some contention here. Some people say that as long as the R73 is sent, then the QSO is complete. Some people say you got to go the other way. It's just one of those things you just play by the rules that you want to play with. I go by if one of the stations sends R73, even if the other station doesn't copy that, or he doesn't get the 73, it's still a QSO. Some guys will log it if they get that far, some guys won't, and you just never really know. Now, let's say that Bill's calling CQ, and I call him, and then he comes back and gives me a report, and then I send him the R05, but let's say he doesn't hear me, then there's some QSB and he fades out, or maybe there's some interference and he isn't copying me. Well, since he didn't get my R05, which is the next sequence, he will continue to send me my report. And he'll continue doing that until either he gets my R05 or whatever, or else gives up. And then same thing along the different sequences. You keep sending your current sequence until you copy the next sequence, and then the program will automatically adjust to send the proper exchange for the next sequence. Next slide. Now, if we're doing a schedule, like let's say we're far apart, we want to try to do a meteor scatter contact, and we don't know when we're going to hear each other. I mean, we might sit there for 20 minutes before we hear a first meteor. So basically, you decide who goes first and goes second. That's very important because you don't want to be transmitting at the same time. And so we'll just call each other, and we'll keep on doing that until one of the stations hears it, and then they'll start responding with a signal report. And you'll keep on doing it to a step through. And of course, if you don't get the next step, we keep sending the same exchange over and over again until we catch the next one. Then we hop to the one that follows. And generally, when you do a schedule, you have an agreement. We'll do it for a half an hour or 15 minutes or whatever it is. And if you don't get it by then, you're not complete by then, then you try it again later. Next slide. Here's one in actual use. So I contacted the guy in Sri Lanka. You can see the waterfall up in the top where all the different signals you hear are. On below that to the left is all the signal that is being decoded during that last 15-second sequence. The ones that are highlighted in green mean the guy's calling CQ, so it's easy to find people calling CQ. If something's in red, it means somebody's calling you. And on the right side is I set what frequency I'm trying to receive. So if I click on somebody's CQ, the program will put the little green bar that I'm concentrating the frequency that he's transmitting on. So the stuff on the right just shows the decodes and things that's going on. So you're not hunting through a long string of decoded signals to figure it is. So see, he calls CQ, and then yellow is me calling him. You probably can't read this, but then the first red is him coming back with a signal report. And the next yellow below that is me sending the R in the signal report, and then red below that is him sending the R 73, and then me sending the 73. So that's on how the program works, but we aren't going to go into too much detail what's going on the other windows and stuff there. Next slide. Now, the signal reports is signal noise ratio in dB. And basically that is how strong is that signal compared to the noise in the passband. So it's not really like how strong they are. Usually it is how strong they are, because if they're strong, they're going to be loud. But it's not an absolute figure like look at the S meter and it's all your S7 or S9 or whatever it is. It's all relative. And so you could have a strong station, but if it's a lot of QRM in there and a lot of noise, the signal to noise ratio may be kind of low. A lot of times you'll be working some guy and you'll give him a +20, he'll give you a -10 or something, or -15. And it could be a couple of different reasons. One is because of differences in transmit power. Maybe one of you guys is running more power than the other. But also because if you give him a good signal report and he comes back with a bad one or a small, he just might have a lot of noise. And sometimes you'll see some rare DX guy who's really strong and he's calling CQ and he's not answering, and you look and you see like 20 different guys calling him. How come he's not coming back to anybody? It's probably because he's got a lot of noise and he's not decoding signals. the noise levels from bad electrical power and stuff in third world countries is often really, really bad. Next slide. So I want to talk about some of the different WSJT modes. Okay. So the most popular one is FT8 mode. If you look at the specifications up in the top, it's a good general purpose mode. It's about, the signals are 50 hertz wide, so you can fit quite a few of them in the 2.8 kilohertz. Fixed 15-minute transmit receive cycles. That's standard. It doesn't change. About the minimum signal strength you can work is about a minus 24, and it uses the 8 FSK type modulation. Again, this was originally developed for 6 meters, but the HF people started using it, and it's right now is the most popular mode on HF. It surpasses both sideband and CW. Next slide. Now, there's some sub-modes that if you get on, you want to be aware of. The first one that came out was called Foxhound mode. And that is designed so you get more QSOs per hour. It was for de-expeditions to use this. And it works a little bit differently. Instead of just having one transmission to one guy, you can have different streams. You can have one stream, which is just one signal, or you can have 2 or 3 or 4, depending whatever he sets it for. And each transmission sequence can also have information for 2 different QSOs. So if he's running 4 streams and probably on an average of 1.5 QSOs per stream, you can get quite a few more QSOs per minute or hour than you can just by the usual ones. So there's certain criteria that go on. First of all, he's supposed to transmit below 100 hertz or 1,000 hertz. If you call him, you have to transmit above 1,000 hertz, and otherwise he won't decode you. And then once he calls a station, your transmit frequency will go down to match the one frequency that he called you on. And so then you finish the QSO on the below 1,000 hertz. And the reason for that is if there's a lot of people calling, he may pick your call out, but there might be so many different guys, and all of a sudden somebody else starts transmitting on the same frequency and covers you up, and he can't hear you anymore. But if you transmit down below 1,000 on his frequency, you should be the only person calling, so you should have a clear frequency. So that's the advantage of that. Now, there used to be a requirement that you had to shift. Now, the later versions took that out. I'll explain a little bit why in a minute. So you don't have to QSY. I generally do if I'm seeing a guy using Foxhound mode, but sometimes it works better if you don't, and I can't explain why. I just found that to be the case. Now, the problem is that now you're splitting up the DX station signal. So if you go from one stream to 2 streams, half your power is going to be on one stream and half your power is going to be on this stream. So what happens to signal to noise ratio? You lose 3 dB because the power is split in half. If he goes to 4 streams, then it's another 3 dB down. So I've seen cases where the guy was like minus 17 and so well, I'm going to go add another stream or 2, and all of a sudden I can't copy anymore because it gets too weak. So that's one of the disadvantages of this mode. Next slide. Yeah.
Question on Foxhound.
I'll show you that in a second. There's another one called, the software for WSJT is open source. You can download the source code and modify it yourself. And there's different people who have done that for various reasons. And there's a guy, LZ2HV, came up with something called MSHV. He followed the Joe Taylor naming scheme with MS stands for multiple stream. It's very similar to FT8, but first of all, it does not require that the station QSY. Now, and so, and you can call it any frequency. And the advantage to that is that now instead of only being able to call a guy above 1,000 hertz, you can't go down below about 300 hertz, but you get about another 700 hertz of bandwidth to call, so it spreads out the calling stations, which helps. You don't have to QSY, but the problem is, as Pat says, how do you know the difference between Fox and Hound and MSHV? If you look at the decode window below there, you see OK1 CMQR73, then the semicolon and the PY4 station where he's sending a signal report. That basically is the hint that it's FT8 and not MSHV. But now you got to watch for a while because he may not be decoding enough stations that the program actually splits them up that way. And so if you, he might be using Fox and Hounds, we just not. So if you don't know, I would generally assume that it is Fox and Hounds until you know otherwise. Next slide. Now there's a new mode called Super Fox Hound. This is experimental. And if you look on the waterfall, you see the dark orange and yellow bands. Those are the callers. But if you look in the sequences between, you don't see the normal FT8 pattern. You see just kind of random little dashes and dots. This looks like more like noise. What this does is the Hound station, the DX station, transmits all the information in a wider band signal. So you're not diluting the signal among multiple streams. So you're not losing that signal noise ratio. And that's the advantage of that. If the guy's using MSHV or he's using Fox and Hounds, you will see down in his transmit, 1 to 4 different, in normal FT8 type stuff, signals 50 hertz wide and whatever. And some lowlifes who like to pretend they're the DX station and get people all excited because they worked the DX station, they really didn't. Pirate the guy's call. You hear them on sideband CW from time to time, unfortunately. Well, these guys would go and find where the different streams were, and then they'd start to set up their own using the fake call, so it looked like it was just another stream from the other ones. And so you'd work this, not knowing this last one was a pirate and not the DX station, and you find out you didn't work the guy. So what this mode does is it, if you're going on a DX expedition, you go to the Northern California DX Association, and they'll issue a special key. And so when he's transmitting, the DX is transmitting, you'll see the decode of all the stations or all the replies that he's made to all the different stations. There'll be a little thing that says, DX1, DXX verified. So you're really working the right guy. So it's all encrypted and super secret, and it took them about 4 days to break it, so you can't be 100% sure. Now, this is experimental. I've used it, made a number of contacts. I like it a lot. Now, the current software release is the release candidate. It's not the official release. It's experimental. It's going to expire on December 31st. My guess in the next week or so, they'll come out with a regular version that implements the Super Fox Hound mode. Next slide. FT4 is like FT8. How many people have used FT4? Yeah. FT4 it was designed to be like FT8, but faster for contesting. It takes a minimum of a minute to make a contact on FT8. So what they did was they made it a little bit wider, and they cut the period down in half to 7.5 seconds. But on any sort of thing like that, it's always a trade-off. And the trade-off is now your minimum signal's around -16 dB. I've seen a few decodes at -20, but I don't think I've ever made a contact, which is probably weaker than a -14 on both ends. And this uses a 4-tone FSK. But it's used for contesting. You see more and more in casual operation. Now, it's a good place to check if you want to get on a band in FT8 and the band is just really, really crowded. Go up to FT4, you might find there's more room and it's easier to workstation. So But again, you have to have stronger signals. Next slide. MSK 144, this is designed for meteor scatter. Now, meteors are a whole different propagation mode. We have a meteor that goes through the atmosphere. It ionizes as it burns up, and you can reflect a VHF signal off of it. 2 meters, 6 meters, 10 meters is possible, and only recently was it legal to use this mode on 10 meters is the bandwidth. But the signals are actually usually pretty strong. They can be quite strong, but they may not last very long. Once in a while, you get what's called a blue whizzer, and maybe you'll get the opening for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute on a really good, especially in 6 meters, they'll last longer than they will on 2 meters for the same meteor. But a lot of times we get these things called pings, and they're just a fraction of a second. So what MSK 144 does is that it transmits the information sequence very, very fast and repeats it. So even if you only get a half a second or so of a signal, that's enough to get the information for that exchange in, rather than the full 15 seconds like for FT8. So that allows you to make contacts with meteor pings that are way too short to be useful for anything else. And that's what's really cool about it. It's really made meteor scatter interesting. Now, if you've got something for 6 or 2 meters and you got the ability to do this, is it the Geminid or the Orionid that's this month? Geminids, yeah. It peaks like on Friday night, but anytime this week, especially in the morning, sometime between, the best time is usually between midnight and noon. I think there's between the combination of the geometry of the Earth and the meteors and the operators, you're best being on between about 5 and 8 in the morning, because that's when there's most operators. And this is a lot of fun. I've done a lot of meteor scatter. It's a blast. The couple of things to keep in mind is that there's Doppler shift, and the program takes care of that. But your frequency calibration has to be very precise. You don't want to be off by more than a few hertz, otherwise you might be the other guy may decode it. There's something called the frequency tolerance, and if you make the frequency tolerance narrower, you can detect weaker signals. But it also means that if his signal's off frequency, you're not going to get him. So I generally set it for the maximum. But that's a lot of fun to work meteor scatter. I've worked a lot of things. Gary. There's a program called, well, there's a couple of things. Yeah, if you look on there, they'll show 2 frequency or 2 beam headings, which is one's a little bit on each side of the center one. Unless you got a really narrow beam, just point it, we've got a really big beam with a very narrow bandwidth, which most of us don't have, just point it right at the guy, and that's be close enough. But the other question is, when should you try to work these people? And there's a program, I can't remember what it is, no, well, Ping Jockey is a place where you can go to set schedules. That's a good place to see who's on, and you see the guy's posting on calling CQ, and he's from North Carolina. So you point the beam towards North Carolina. So go to Ping Jockey. There's another program I forgot, which will tell you what the best directions are at the current time because of the geometry of where the radiant point of the meteor shower is and stuff like that. But yeah, go on Ping Jockey, and it'll just show you who's on and what frequency and when they're calling CQ. Yes. It was designed to be a low power mode. And I remember when I first got on FT8, I used to never run more than 25 watts. But now you've got a lot of guys that are running 1,500 watts because of competition. Like a lot of stuff in radio. Yeah, a lot of stuff with radio. It's not getting your signal to the guy, but being stronger than the other guy that's calling. So you got to be strong to beat out the other guy. Now, if you're doing moon bounce or meteor scatter, run as much as you can because that'll help you a lot because that's weak signal. Fred? Oh, if you have a, if you have a, if you have a, if you have a schedule, you just set up on Ping Jockey. The convention is the westernmost station goes first, but generally when you, some guy says, hey, I'm looking, anybody want to work Wisconsin? And some guy will come back, yeah, I'd like to, I need Wisconsin, I'd like to work you. Then generally, now there's a set frequency that's standard, but a lot of times you're better off going, going to a different frequency than the calling frequency. Like I have a problem. Some of you guys know K9DJT, Gary's a member of the club. He'll be on and I'll be on and a couple other guys in Wisconsin will be on, and we all got to be on the same thing because we all decide we're going to go east or we're going to go west because, you know, they'll cover us up the stuff. So, but generally you can set up a schedule in Ping Jockey, even though there's a standard, usually it gets verified, you know, you go first or I go first. Yeah. You do, but you don't have a whole lot of control of that unless you can raise or lower your antenna. Yeah, the elevation, the azimuth, the direction you point it towards the guy, but the elevation. Yeah. Well, you're on the same frequency, you're on the calling frequency. So, you know, well, yeah, and you hope that there's not too many strong guys. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have, yeah, repeat the questions. Generally, if you do a schedule, you'll try to find another frequency. If there's random stuff, a guy will just call CQ and then everybody calls. I mean, one of the things too is if a lot of guys are calling, like, you know, he might hear me, but he may not hear the guy out of Chicago. Ken.
Calls at the same time. If you all have your frequency tolerances apart, I have seen multiple decodes on the other end. In other words,
Yeah.
two people calling me and I've seen both of them. So yeah, technically you don't want to be transmitting on top of somebody else. But in reality, if there's two or three chasing the one guy, they will all be clobbering each other. And it's just a matter of, if you're lucky, you're separated by 50 or 100 hertz. And the person on the other end will decode both of you for the most part.
Yeah, you can get multiple decodes.
Because because the issue that I have, because I don't have a directional antenna on 6 meters, is I'll always listen and make sure that there's nobody else nearby transmitting. If they are, I will transmit on the same cycle that they're on, so that we're not covering each other up on receive. And
Well,
that to me is the important part, because FT8, it doesn't make any difference. But on
right.
MSK
Yeah, here's the
144, you
problem.
take the whole band.
Yeah, because like, let's say there's somebody nearby and he wants to work somebody east and I want to work somebody west, then there's me a problem. So some of the local guys around here that I work with, we kind of, well, we have a Slack channel, we communicate and say, hey, I need this for a new grid or a new state, so we'll just let him work it. You know, because we don't need it, give him the first shot. But if there's something, we're just trying to both all make contacts, we'll just all kind of go, you know, we'll all go beaming east or all be beaming west, or just, so we're transmitting the same in the same times.
I've done it, MSK 144. I've listened for you and Gary, and I try to transmit the same time you do.
Yeah, that's basically the best thing to do. Or else get a schedule on Ping Jockey and trying to get a schedule on a different frequency. Yeah, but it's tougher. The higher the frequency, I mean, I think people have done in 432 meter scatter, but you need really big showers and you need power and you need a lot of luck. And your maximum range is going to be about 1,250 to 1,500 miles. it's a challenging, but it's fun. It's the best way to get a lot of states. Like 6 meters isn't such a big deal because you have other modes, but 2 meters is pretty, you want to work a lot of states, you know, other than tropo, but even tropo sometimes gets some harder to get the larger ranges. It's pretty amazing. I once worked a guy in Florida on 2 meters, and he was running 12 watts on a 7-element homebrew Yagi on a step ladder in his backyard. That's pretty good. I mean, I would recommend trying to run 100 watts or more if you can, and maybe a higher antenna, because as Carl mentioned, the takeoff angle is important because these are going to be coming at a very low angle. Now, there are some cases where I have a big hill to the north of me, and I've needed to make some contacts up in the northern part of like Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I have set up scheduled on meteor scatter because I know it's going to be a pretty high angle, but generally it's a pretty low angle. And there's a little chart on the WSJT will tell you what the angle is going to be and stuff. So, anyone else want to go on to the next slide? JT65 is designed for moon bounce. It's 175 hertz wide. It's fixed 60-second periods. Now this one, because of it's a longer period of time, we can get down to minus 29 dB. I have made contacts at minus 29 dB because I have a pit. I don't have it anymore, but I had a peanut whistle station, and the big guys would be able to pull me out. If you look on the waterfall, you see where the green is. There's a signal. It's actually pretty strong. It's a lot of times you'll barely see anything. You can still decode it. Now the signals, the moon bounce, the signals are very weak. There's lots of slow QSB, and there's a little bit of a Doppler shift too. Next slide. Q65 is a relatively new mode. It's designed for a UHF scatter. There's several different combinations of submodes. One is the signal width, either 60, 120, or 300 hertz. Those are the modes A, B, and C. And there's multiple sequence times, 15, 30, 60, 120, and 30, 300 seconds. And generally, the longer the time and the narrower the bandwidth, the weaker the signals that you can detect. And you can tell if you do this, you want to know what other mode he's using, otherwise you won't be decoding. And like 60C means 60 seconds of the C bandwidth. Excuse me. That's good for fast fading signals. Interesting enough, it works in Aurora. I've made Aurora contacts on 6 meters with this mode. It's the only digital mode that I know of that works on Aurora, because have you ever heard an Aurora signal? On CW, it sounds like more like a buzzer. On sideband, the signal will sound like Donald Duck. But by using 60C, the C means that the signals are spread out, so the Doppler shift caused by the Aurora will allow the signals the different tones not to overlap each other. And it's pretty interesting. I actually decoded a station off from Alaska, this mode 1, during one of the big Aurora things. Now, it's also been very good on EME. For some reason, all the other bands besides 2 meters have adopted Q65, but for some reason, the 2 meter guys, most of it's still on JT65. I really don't know. If you look in the bottom, you see the really bright red, that's a local guy transmitting. If you look on the far right, there's a more distant one. It looks like more just speckles for a more distant signal on Q65. Next slide. JT9, this is designed for the really low frequencies, like 630 and 2200 meter bands. Very narrow, 60, and you can have different time periods, so you have to know what mode the other guy is going to be using. I've never contacted anybody, but I have decoded. If you look on the that bright orange bar there, that's a JT9 signal on 630 meters. Next slide. Whisper is another mode. This is a beacon mode. This is not a QSO mode. It's good for testing propagation. It's a beacon only. The signals are very, very narrow, only 6 hertz wide. See right in the middle there at around 1500, those are all different WSJT beacon signals. And most guys running this are running less than 5 watts. The data there is a call sign, the grid, and the effective radiated power and dBm. Now, there's a 2-minute transmit period, but you don't want to be transmitting like every one or every other one or every third one, because you want to be seeing who else is on. And if they're on the same sequence, you'll always be transmitting at the same time. So you'll transmit more or less randomly. So you might transmit this section, maybe you won't, and then maybe not the next one, but then maybe you'll do it the one after that. So it's kind of random transmit sequences. So you'll be able to hear the other stations. Next slide. This is what the Whisper decode windows look. You can see the station, the guy's grid, and then dBm and the effective radiated power. You see the second one, he's got a 30 dBm. What does that mean? How much power is he running? dBm is 1 milliwatt, 1/1000th of a watt. So 30 dB is a factor of 1,000. So his effective power is 1 watt. Now the effective power is the amount of power you transmit multiplied by your antenna gain. Now this is on 630 meters, so his antenna gain is probably like minus 25 dB if he's got a good antenna. So he's probably running a little bit more power, but his antenna is so inefficient, he has very little power output. Next slide. There's a site called WhisperNet where you can report the stuff that you're, and you can see who's out there and who's hearing who, which is kind of cool. And you can select just what band you want and things like that. It's got a lot of good information. Next one. I played around and I built my own Whisper transmitter a couple of years ago when 630 meters became open. You can see the transmitters inside it. It uses a little Arduino and uses a frequency synthesis chip. Now this is an FSK type thing with it was 4. And basically the Arduino hard-coded and tell the frequency synthesizer transmit on this frequency. Now I want to shift the frequency up. I don't know what it was, 20 hertz or whatever, or less than a few hertz. Then it would shift the transmit frequency, and then the timing would say, okay, now I switched to some. So it's just the computer and the Arduino was telling it transmit here, transmit here, transmit here to generate the codes. It was hard coded. That's in the bottom right hand corner. Up right above that is the transmitter, which is a simple little FET. It's like a $1 FET switch. And it ran about class D, about 12 watts. And then on the far hand side, you have the low pass filter to get rid of the harmonics. Now, the antenna was very small. It was an inverted L, about 45 feet up and 45 feet horizontal. I loaded it with a coil that's a variometer. These things were very popular in the early days of radio. You don't see them very much, but essentially it's a variable coil. We have the 2 turns on the outside of the bucket, and the inside we have some more coils on PVC pipe, and I can adjust that, and then the magnetic fields either add or subtract each other, so it changes the inductance. So that's how I tune the antenna. Now I was running 12 watts. I figure my antenna was about 1% efficient, so I was getting about 1/10 of a watt output, effective radiated power. But I was picked up in Hawaii several times with this system. Now, if you're interested in trying this, but you don't want to tie up your radio, QRP Labs sells some beacon transmitter kits. I think they're around $35, and you need to also buy out the low pass filter for what band you're going to use, and that's another $5. For around $40, you can build a Whisper transmitter beacon if you want to give this a try. Next slide. FST4 and FST4W. This is a new one. It's again for the lower. It's designed for really low frequency. There's 2 versions, and the W means it's a beacon. This one gets up to 1800 second periods for transmit. And I've never transmit. I have decoded a few signals on there. I don't know how popular it was is mostly for beacons, I think, but because so many guys were using beacons using WSJT, I don't know how much this is superior, but I don't know how much many people have done. But you can see it goes down to minus 45 dB, which is really, really down in the noise. And another thing, it's not time synchronized. It doesn't have to be it's got sync stuff built in, so you can be in whatever time, you don't have to wait. Yeah. That's Gaussian, yeah. The G in the mode is a Gaussian modulation. So a different form of FSK. Next slide. So that's it. There's a lot of different modes that you can use with this, not just FT8, and they're all better for different things. And it's possible to make contacts you'd never make contacts on CW sideband. And requires a PC, a radio, and an interface. And there's ones for different types of modes and bands. So a lot of selection. It's a lot of fun. Any other questions?
The 5 or 9 FSK, 65 FSK, those are not powers of 2, so they must have one additional frequency, because, for example, 4 FSK is 2 bits per symbol, 8 is 3 bits
I
per
don't know
symbol.
the details
So is
of
it like a synchronization tone?
Well,
that
JT65 has a synchronization tone. Yeah, I don't know. They don't have us for the other. Some maybe some other ones do FST whatever one. I don't know. I don't know if it does or not.
they're powers of 2, but when I seen the extra
Yeah,
tone, then it must have a purpose or something.
yeah, I'm sure it does. Ken?
Just kind of a comment, but although much of the strength of this thing being able to dig signals out of the noise is due to the digital processing, in some cases the sync tone sets up timing and all that, but keep in mind, this wasn't possible until you were able to realize digital, your software, and most of these modes are some kind of an FSK mode. I don't want to load. And so you've got multiple tones shifting in frequency, and basically the program has a bank of very narrow digital filters, and that allows you to dig a signal out of the noise. Because I think they're referencing to a 2,500 hertz bandwidth.
Right,
Well, with 2.5 hertz filters, that gives you a lot
right.
of
If you
gain.
narrow the bandwidth, you cut out the amount of noise off frequency, and that helps you.
The question may have been asked before, but I think you answered a different one. One of the issues that I've had is if you're trying to work a DX station that's working Fox and Hound mode, how do you know that they're working Fox and Hound mode as opposed to just working regular FT8?
Yeah, sometimes you may not. If he's only got one stream going, you may not know, and you just work them. If he's only got one stream and he's only working one guy at a time, he could technically be in Fox and Hound mode, but because he's not decoding signals well enough to do, like you saw the one signal report with the 2 different call signs separated by the semicolon. If he's not decoding two signals, then you won't be able to tell. You just work them regularly and hope for the best. But eventually, a lot of these times, these guys will change too. You'll see there's 1 stream, and there's 2 streams, and there's 4 streams, and they'll change depending if signals are good, then they'll go to more streams. But if they aren't getting decoded or people are having to come copy, they'll go back to 2 or 1 stream.
You really should stay above 1,000 hertz in the transmit window.
Yeah, it'd probably be a good idea. But now if he's above 1,000 hertz, then you don't have to worry about that.
I noticed in your early slides that you had an example QSO. So that's the actual ASCII data that's sent.
It's not ASCII.
Oh, it is not.
Everything's encoded like an FT8. You don't send like WB9. There's a code of a few bits for WB9, and there's another one for WA9, there's another one for W9 and K9. And
So a form of compression.
it's an encoding scheme. I don't know all the details. Now, sometimes you'll see two square brackets with a couple of dots. That means that they could not, that prefix or whatever wasn't one, it's a new prefix, and it wasn't not very common. They only have so many they can use. So then they go through another encoding thing, and then you have to know the kind of the key and decode it first, or have some idea what it is. So WSJT was not able to decode that.
Okay, the other question I have is payload. It looks, one of the things that disturbs me about this is there's no conversation. You know, and normally with CW or with voice, the guy talks about where he lives, what
Yeah,
kind of antenna.
there's some guys who have made something, I forgot what it's called, where they use this to transmit bits and pieces so you can put a QSO together. It just seems really kludgy to me. Get on PSK31 if that's what you want to do.
Okay.
This is for making the context and get the QSO for your ward. If you want to talk to somebody, use RIDI or PSK31. Yeah, JT, that's the one. That seems like a really kludgy thing to me, so I have no interest in trying that.
But has anybody tried to do a below the noise floor type system with
PSK31 is below the noise.
It is. Okay.
When that was really popular, it was the first really popular digital mode. I'd be astounded because I'd call CQ and I wouldn't see anybody calling, and all of a sudden I see print out W9XT, DE, whatever.
Okay.
It's below the noise. Paul? Okay, Paul says he's done JT call with 5 watts of South Africa, so I'm not particularly interested. I've never followed in. If that's what you want to try, give it a try. I mean, it's pretty, what you can do with digital is pretty impressive stuff. Or kind of over time, if you want any more questions, you want to see me in the break or after the meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.